We had a giant Jenga board game, but like oversized, really large Jenga. And he needed to get high enough to work on the roof on the inside. And so he brought over all the pieces of the Jenga set and built it and then used it as a stepping stool. So he was literally standing on a 5-foot tall Jenga tower.
Welcome to the TheKnifeWife podcast. I'm Suze, married to Bob Terzawola. This podcast is about couples who live, love, and work together. It has little to do with knives. Well, here we are again. Hey, everybody. How are you doing? Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your cards and letters. Bob, say hello.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for listening.
This is part 2 of Dan and Anna, and we left them in Guatemala. They're still in Guatemala. Dan, moved from New Mexico to New York to Guatemala, but that was the only way he was going to meet his life partner. So it's all good. We're delighted. It really worked out. We've been getting some questions at TheKnifeWife on Instagram and through our website, terzawola.net. We've been getting some questions, so we're going to answer 2 questions this time, and we thank you. And I was not really a very good podcaster in that I didn't write down all the names of the people who sent them in. So next time I will make sure I do that. And if you haven't listened to the first episode of this 2-part episode, please listen to that first so you know where we're at. And I think you're going to fall in love with Dan and Anna. Anyway, one of the questions is, Bob, what kind of ducks do you like?
Well, everybody knows I like ducks. My 2 favorite species, I think, are the pekins, which are the white ducks. Everybody knows what a white duck looks like. And my favorite one was Daisy. I have a picture of me with her. And what's known as a Swedish blue, which is a big, beautiful duck, very, very sedate, but absolutely gorgeous. We had one called Victoria, I think her name was. And when she came into the flock, everybody looked at her, all the ducks looked at her and said, wow, look at that.
Yeah, we got her from the state fair. She was the prize winner, so it was like a supermodel coming into the flock. And we put her in her own little space for a while so that she didn't get pecked or whatever. And they would all come and look at her, and the boy ducks were really in love with her.
They were.
And the other girl ducks were like, well, we're going to get a break now because they're going to be busy with her. But anyway, the other question is for me, and the guy's name was G. Clark, and, Wrigley Field is on Clark and Addison, and maybe that's not his real name. But anyway, he asked me, why are you a Cubs fan and not a Sox fan? Well, in my family, it goes back many generations. As far back as the Cubs go, my family was from the north side of Chicago, and they were big Cubs fans. I mean, my father was such a Cubs fan that if they lost and I came home from school, my mother would say, don't mention the Cubs. Don't talk about the Cubs. And he took me every year to the opener. I missed school. He would write a note. He taught me to lie really well. He would say I had the Wrigley flu. I had the Waveland Avenue upside downs, or he'd write all these crazy reasons I couldn't be at school the day before. And I went to every Cubs opener until they moved to North Carolina when I was an adult. And so I didn't really have a choice in the matter. And I would say it's a sickness in my family. And my brother got it too. And when we moved to California, people said, Bob Terzawola's moving to California. I said, yeah. And the Cubs won the World Series for the first time and broke the curse. And I was with my brother when they won the World Series. And we just couldn't believe it. If we could have done a seance and brought my dad back at that moment, we're just hoping he watched because it was such a big thing for our family. And my kids, they don't care about baseball. It's done, and I don't believe my brother's kids care about it either. But I didn't really have a choice in the matter. I'm a Cubs fan. I'm always going to be a Cubs fan. I'm never going to be a Sox fan. The Sox usually beat us in the Crosstown Classic, because we only use 9 players to play baseball. But the American League needs 10.
Plus, you were almost born at Wrigley Field.
I was, and I told
You
that
told
story.
that story.
Yeah, I told that story. So I really, I didn't have a choice in the matter. It's just how it shook out.
Didn't the movie Back to the Future predict that?
It did. It did.
Mhm.
I don't think it predicted the right year, but it did. And it gave us all hope because, and now we live in San Diego and the Padres never win. And so I relate to them. I've been to many Padres games because I know what it's like to root for the underdog. I did it my entire life. So anyway, so let's get to Dan and Anna, who are down in Guatemala. And Dan and Anna had a crazy idea, or Dan had the crazy idea, and Anna jumped on the bandwagon to start a sort of a fantasy theme park on the top of a mountain that had no electricity and no running water. What did you do when you were trying to build? Dan was in charge of infrastructure, which were things like getting a road up there. There was no road, right, Dan?
Yeah, no, there was a trail that they call a servidumbre, which is to say that you had access up there, but it was getting a car up was very difficult. We had to widen the road, and luckily for us, a lot of this work had already been done, where they got permission from all the neighbors to donate, a few extra centimeters here and there, so that the road could be wide enough for a car.
One car, correct?
One car, one direction.
Yeah.
And it basically was, you go up the road and it was a 24-degree incline. So you needed a 4x4 to go up it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
One side was a hilly mass of trees and bushes. And then the other side of the road was a 300-meter drop down into the valleys. So that's 900 feet. It was high. You definitely felt like the first times we were going up there, we were flirting with death driving a car on this road. It took years, literally years, to get that road to be stable and safe. And even now, it's still, I wouldn't really trust it 100%. So one of the first things that we did, getting that business started, was we bought a horse.
Yeah, and have you ever had a horse before, Dan? Did you ever own a horse before?
No, I had never owned a horse before.
Perfect.
And we named the horse Atreyu. And we were using the horse to carry materials up the road because we felt unsafe doing it in a car. So this poor horse, he was a young horse. Yeah, no, he was like a year or 2 years old. But we were loading him up with cement and chairs or whatever we needed to carry up the hill. We would just put it on the horse and walk him back and forth.
And we also walked up with bags of cement.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the horse. It was a team effort.
So you walked a kilometer with a bag of dry cement on your backs.
Yeah. That's half a mile for you Americans.
Yeah, for you Americans, it's half a mile. I don't know why we chose miles and they chose kilometers, but that's another story.
I remember one time I was going up the hill. I was carrying a wooden chair and a big metal tube. And I get up to the top of the hill and I'm just like, oh my God, that was rough going up that hill carrying a chair and a heavy tube. And I look down and there's our worker and he's literally carrying a couch by himself going up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And not even breaking a sweat.
Not even breaking a sweat. At one point, he kind of was whistled so that I would move out of the way. And he carried the couch past me.
We were all humbled that day.
Yes. There was another time we were taking logs out of the forest to build a cabin. And, we got three gringos to a log. And the logs are, 15 feet long. They're green wood. They're heavy. And same thing. Here comes the worker. He's like, get out of the way. He's got one log just to himself.
Yep.
And he's got the machete wedged under his shoulder to support the log so it doesn't fall. It was clearly he had done this many times.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the first year, I would say, was really me being up there just getting basic systems going. We didn't have water. It took 4 years for the electricity to work its way up the mountain. The water system that we first set up was just collecting rainwater and filtering it. The first 4 years, like I said, no electricity, so we had solar and wind power.
Right.
Yeah. And that was a pain. You couldn't use power tools. You could only have one refrigerator. You couldn't do a lot of things. No espresso machine.
You gringo.
It always makes, I always think about that time. I think it was the first week we were open and we had advertised, what was going on. And the guy gets up there and he's like, "Hi, excuse me, can I have your Wi-Fi password?" And I was like, "What? We're on the top of the mountain in the middle of nowhere. Like, why do you think there's Wi-Fi here?" And he goes, "Oh, okay. So where's the TV where you're going to show the game?" And I was like, "Show the game? What are you talking about?" And we got a lot of that, like customers coming up at first just not understanding there's no electricity here. There's no Wi-Fi. Just be in nature.
You're in a cloud forest right now.
Is a cloud forest good for solar power?
Yeah, no, it doesn't affect it.
It doesn't? Okay.
Yeah, like if you can see, you're still getting 80%.
Anna at this point was taking care of events. She was designing the buildings inside and out. And if you were there, it had Anna's touch on it. It really had her personality, her lively, playful, happy personality. Anything that was painted or whatever, it just said Anna all over it. Not that you're not happy, Dan, but when I think of Anna, she's working on something right now. She was telling me a website, and it's she gets to be fun and playful and be herself. But anyway, so you were talking. One of the things that was important to you in this fantasy theme park is ecologically being sustainable. And I don't know that was necessarily important to your partners, but it was really important to you. And there were 3 things you were telling me you did, and they are quite lengthy stories. So start with eco bricks, which I have no idea until you told me what an eco brick was. But they're fascinating. I want to make them now.
Well, start with construction. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing was we wanted these buildings to be 100% sustainable and not contributing to a lot of the problems that developing countries have. So we didn't want to use much cement. That's what we were trying to avoid. So one of the things we did was we built eco bricks out of garbage, where we would just, you grab a 2-liter bottle of Coke and then go for a hike in the forest and just pick up every piece of garbage you could find and stuff the bottle until it was stuffed all the way and you couldn't put one more piece of garbage in. And then you had to let it dry in the sun for a couple days so that it wouldn't mold on the inside. And then you do that 10,000 times and you now have a giant pile of eco bricks ready to use. And you use them to build walls. You use them just like they're regular bricks. And I was definitely very skeptical at first, when we were... Yeah, you basically sandwich them between chicken wire and then kind of tighten the chicken wire around them. And it just didn't seem like it was going to be structurally sound. And then we finished doing it. You put mezclon on the outside, which is kind of like a little bit of cement mixed with clay. And it just produced these wonderful results that lasted for years. They were dry, they were strong. We never had any issues with the eco block walls. And then all the wood that we used came from a sustainable tree farm, where we found this guy, this super crazy eccentric guy who was a former logger in the Petén rainforest back in the 70s. And one day he just cut down some big, beautiful tree and was like, "What am I doing?" And he moved to a different part of the country and founded a sustainable tree farm where for every tree they cut down, they plant 5. And they're supporting native species and blah, blah, blah. And so we did all our wood orders from that. And that was, it was more expensive to order the wood that way. And you kind of had to go according to his schedule because he would only cut on the full moon and blah, blah, blah.
There's a business model.
And eventually we got all the houses built using those materials. And it was the other thing we did was we did a lot of protection in the forest because there's this beautiful cloud forest right above the hills of Antigua. And there's a lot of, endemic species that are there. We did a biology report with one of the universities in Guatemala City, and they counted 126 different species of bird just in that one spot.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, to like kind of put that in perspective, I think California entirely has something like 25 species of birds that you'll see there. So there was a huge amount of biodiversity that we were trying to protect.
Yeah.
And there was also a lot of illegal deforestation going on. So one of Ana and I's first projects that we did up there was a reforestation project with the Ministerio del Ambiente, the environmental agency of Guatemala. Provided 1,000 trees, and we gathered up a bunch of volunteers, and we went and we planted trees all over this mountain.
That was a great day.
Yeah, that was really fun. We did a lot of prep work where we had to dig the holes in the days before, and then in one day with something like 50 volunteers, we planted all 1,000 trees in one day.
Yeah.
And so we did projects like that. We were also fighting against this electrical company that was trying to cross through the cloud forests and cut down all the trees to put their electrical towers up. And so that was the second environmental thing that we did, was like protect the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing that we did, which was also just an amazing project, and I was really proud of this one, was waste management. You know, because most people, I know certainly all the other businesses in that area, were just sending their garbage to the dump and not doing any sort of sorting or any sort of planning of how to manage their waste. All their black and gray water was just going into holes in the ground because there's no sewers up there, obviously. So it really became like kind of an issue of like, how do we process this waste so that we're not just contributing to the problem, A, and B, having a huge bill. It was a bill to send this garbage like really far away to a dump.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that was like multiple systems. We had to figure out the water system. You know, where does the black water go? We had to buy a bunch of biodigesters and, you know, make sure that system was working right. And then we had to figure out the gray water and send that through grease traps and water filtration systems, and finally like kind of do a chemical process to recapture that gray water and then use it for gardening. And then we produced a lot of restaurant food waste. We did the math on it, I forget, it was like 4 tons a month of food waste coming out of the restaurant.
Yeah, because when you're doing that kind of
we were
volume,
paying somebody to take that to the dump. And I was like, why don't we just start composting it? And so we created on the side of the mountain, like in a hidden sort of area, a series of platforms going down the hill that, rather than turning over the same giant pile of compost every 2 weeks, we would just kind of toss it down to the next platform as we were adding micro
biomes,
bacteria, like microbiology was eating the compost to speed up the process. And so we got to the point where every 2 weeks we would produce 1,000 pounds of really high quality compost that then we started selling. So we turned what was a negative thing into a positive thing. And, you know, that compost, so many people praised me for the quality of it, and they were like, oh, I love your compost, when can we get more? And I'd be like, oh, it's on the schedule.
Yeah.
We produce X amount.
I've been a gardener for years, made my own compost. We live in a way too small of a lot to do composting. But, you know, when you were telling me about this, I was like, I wish I could get some of that compost. It would just be the most expensive compost to send it to me, but it sounded phenomenal.
Well, it was black, like just so nice and rich and moist. So it would be steaming and be so hot on the inside.
There's compost fires. Lots of people try to compost and they aren't very smart about it. They'll throw chicken manure in there, which is really high in nitrogen, and it's basically like making a bomb. And they'll have these, not a dumpster fire, but a compost fire. That happens a lot.
To add one thing, that on my end, when it came to like creating the interiors of the spaces, I really made it a point to go secondhand shopping to see what I could get to do that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
because it's just part of it. Like, why go get something new when I can just go to the secondhand store, buy a bunch of stuff, and like redo them into something else?
Yes, and you're good at making pretty things out of things that are other people's throwaways. So you're really good
Yeah.
at that.
And Anna was incorporating lots of nature into the project because, like I
Mhm.
said, we were in this beautiful natural place, and there was always branches or flowers or whatever from the area
Yeah.
itself that we used.
Yeah. So we are getting near the end of this podcast. We may have to do a part 3 another day. And that's possible to do. I would love to do that. But there were a couple stories that we have talked about as far as language goes, because Dan, your Spanish was still not really what it is now in at the beginning, and so communication was tough. And stories about that, and then about using the unusual stepladder.
Well, so we had this crew of construction workers that were from the village. There's another thing that we tried to do in terms of being ethical business owners was we really wanted to hire people from the local village and not hire people from further away because this village had like no economic opportunities there.
Well, it did, but it was always agricultural, or for the women, it was being cleaning ladies. But
Mhm.
nobody had thought about the customer service industry,
Right.
before we got there.
And so the construction guys that we got were also very. They only really knew how to do what we call rustic construction.
Yeah, rough carpentry. Mm-hmm.
So they didn't really know how to do a lot of things, but they were good guys and they were ready to work and eager to learn. And what would happen was that we would kind of just talk about certain areas, like what if we put the path here, or what if we cut this tree down and put the building in this spot. And we would come the next day and the tree would be gone and the path would be installed and they would be halfway through building the wall. And you'd be like, what are you guys doing? And they'd be like, the wall you wanted. And I was like, no, we were just talking,
We were
Yeah.
musing.
What if? Yeah. What if
We were
was?
saying what if. They didn't understand the concept of what if.
Yes, because there wasn't a whole lot of let's brainstorm. It was just do this.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we got to the point where we made it a rule of you couldn't talk about what if in front of the construction workers because they would inevitably do it. And then it would be wrong, It's like, oh, the path does not go there. We were just musing. So there was a lot of like problems with that. And then, so usually what I would do in the early days of the construction guys is once we had finalized the plan, I would give them my sketches and show them the notebook. And then I would stick around until it was actually happening the way I wanted it to. And then I would go, okay, I'll be back in half an hour. And they were an interesting bunch. There was one character in particular, Armando, that Armando always had something that you needed to keep an eye on with him. And one day he was working on a vendor's stall repairing the roof. We were installing a fiberglass roof for the very first time. Yeah. And we had a giant Jenga board game, but like oversized, really large Jenga. And he needed to get high enough to work on the roof on the inside. And so he brought over all the pieces of the Jenga set and built it and then used it as a stepping stool. So he was literally standing on a 5-foot tall Jenga tower to be able to work on the roof. And I remember walking up and being like, okay, Armando, don't move. Let me take a picture first, because no one's going to believe me that you're using a Jenga tower as a stepping stool to do construction work. And then very carefully, I was like, okay, get down, go get the real ladder, and come back.
Yeah. How tempting to pull out one of the pieces, like the real.
Oh, it was. Knowing him, it really was.
Yeah. So
Dan, you reminded me of a story of when you and your brother were really young, and I took you up to Pecos to go rappelling. Do you remember rappelling?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I told you to make sure your T-shirt is tucked well into your pants, and you didn't pay attention to me, and the T-shirt got wrapped up in the carabiner, and you were hanging off the cliff and yelling, "Pop, what do I do now?" And I said, "Don't move. I'm going to take a picture." And I took a picture, and I think I still have that picture someplace. And there you were, hanging off because it wasn't against the cliff. You were coming down a free rappel.
I remember.
Then I showed you how to pull yourself up and release the rope and push it backwards and take the T-shirt out and then come down more slowly.
Yes, a childhood trauma I had until now forgotten.
Thanks, Pop. Well, this is going to end this part of this episode, and there's going to be a part 3. We'll schedule that another time. Dan and Anna are very busy, and it was hard to get them on the books to do this. And they probably have to go somewhere like pick up a child or something. But
creative project.
They have many more that they've started, and I wanted to say that, like all businesses or many partnerships that I've known, they have a life and a life cycle. And so the theme park, Dan and Anna are no longer a part of that, but they've gone on to some really fun things, and I can't wait to hear about these other things, Bob.
And I hope they're going to tell us the story about the bus on the roof.
The chicken bus, yes. So when I was in Guatemala, I wanted to go on the chicken bus, and no one would let me go on the chicken bus. And that looked so fun. They're painted colorfully. People are hanging out the windows. Guys are hanging on the back of the bus. I said, I'll go inside. I promise I'll sit in a seat. I'm not going to hang on the back like these guys are doing. And they're like, no, you can't do that. No, Susan. So maybe I'll get to go on a chicken bus after all one day. But anyway, well, thank you for being here, and thank everybody for listening. And there's going to be a part 3, which we'll schedule. And thanks for listening to the TheKnifeWife podcast and getting to know our family better.
Bye,
Love
everybody.
you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please share this with a friend and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Please support our efforts through Patreon at TheKnifeWife, and for all Terzawola goodness, go to terzawola.net. And remember, if you're not laughing, you're not living. Comments and questions can be made on Instagram at the TheKnifeWife Podcast or our Facebook group, The TheKnifeWife Podcast. And if you're a couple who work together and would like to be on our podcast, tell us about yourself with an email at eccentricsues.com or terzawola.net.